Thank you, Ritesh, and thank you, Rasika, again for having me as your guest here today on Peer Up. I want to start with the story, actually. So let's go there. How about that? The first spark was accidental. Two stones struck together at the right angle, sending a tiny ember drifting into a patch of dry grass. For a moment, no one noticed anything. It was just a thin thread of smoke curling upward. But then the grass caught, and a small flame rose, unsteady but determined, as if it was testing its place in the world. People had froze. They'd seen fire before, but always from a distance. It was of storms spreading wildly across the land, something that was uncontrolled, that they had to flee, not face. But this was different. This fire was close, contained, and almost fragile. Someone stepped forward. They didn't know why, but curiosity outran their fear. The heat brushed against their skin, not like an attack, but an invitation. The warmth drew them in, the newness of it, the way the fire and flame moved with purpose. It seemed it needed them to survive. Little did they know it'll help them survive down the line as well. And that's the birth of civilization right there. The first innovation that has led to what we've become today. Without fire, nothing would have happened. Isn't that crazy to think about? And with that, I'll take you into a little introduction about myself. Thank you all for being here today. I'm really, really excited to kick it off because we're talking about something that sits at the center of how ideas travel, how leaders inspire and how businesses move, storytelling. And when we think about storytelling, it's really easy to imagine novels or movies or speeches that go viral. But in reality, it shows up in way more places than we tend to notice. It's in the startup founder explaining why their solution matters. It's in a consulting slide trying to turn messy data into a clear path forward. It's in a recruiting pitch, a product demo, a cold email, a board meeting, even a conversation with your friends every day, and why you believe in the thing that you're building. Especially in business school, storytelling is the invisible skill that either unlocks your opportunities or quietly holds people back. What I've learned is the most compelling stories in business aren't polished, but they're purposeful. They give people a reason to care. They organize complexity. They make change feel possible. And above all, they make the person on the other side feel something: clarity, urgency, curiosity, and hope, among other things. But here's the most surprising part, in my opinion. Storytelling isn't a talent some people are born with, it's a system. It's a set of repeatable tools, something you build upon with practice, intention, and a bit of bravery. Because telling a story often requires someone to show what they believe in, not just what they know. So today, as we dig into the power of pitch and the craft of narrative, I want to invite us all to think about three simple questions. The first, what is the core thing and core truth you want people to walk away with? Not a list of facts, but a truth. Second, what is the emotional arc? Every great story has a great shift from confusion to clarity, from doubt to possibility, or from problem to momentum. And third, especially for college essays, why you? Why now? What makes your perspective worth hearing at this moment? And if we can answer these three things with honesty and intention, we can tell stories that do mean more than inform people, they move people. And before we head into the Q&A section, I'll leave you with this idea. In business, people don't just buy products or strategy or data, they buy meaning, they buy confidence, they buy the story of what something can become, and they buy the people behind it. The people who can articulate that story clearly, authentically, and with clear vision, those are the people who end up shaping what actually gets built today. Now, I'm excited to explore this all with you. Our moderators have a great set of questions prepared, and I've shared a few themes on what we're going to touch on, from how storytelling evolves as you grow as a leader to what makes a pitch land in a room and the role of authenticity in spaces where people often feel pressure to perform. And of course, we'll have some time for your questions as well with the Q&A section after this. And thank you for being here. Let's dive in.
Thank you
Fire
so
away.
thank you so much, Sanjay. I think
Mhm.
it's really important that you're talking about storytelling and how impactful it can be in our lives. Um, now we're gonna ask some questions, and we welcome participants to ask questions by typing them into the chat. So I'm gonna start off with the first question. The title is Power of the Pitch. So, from your experience, how do you define a truly powerful pitch, and what is the single most essential ingredient?
How do I determine what a powerful pitch is and what the most important element of this is, right? So I would say a powerful pitch is something that draws in people, and that kind of ties into the most important element as well. It's a hook. You have to get your reader to actually want to read the rest of your story, right? It's really important to draw them in with something impactful, something that is meaningful to you and to the reader, something that will bring them in. For example, it all started with a spark, it kind of brings people in. Um, it makes them intrigued about, wait, what are you talking about? What do you mean it started with a spark? I want to read more about this. I think that's the most important element in terms of the pitch itself. You have to really hook someone in and make them want to hear the rest of your story out. And that's what really drives the power in your pitch as well, right? Because that's the core starting point. From every place, you have to start from something and build on top of that. So I think that's the answer to that question right there.
Yeah, I'm glad you really talked about the hook there, um, and the way you emphasize the hook. And while speaking about the hook, can you share a simple way, perhaps a like framework or formula that students can use to create a compelling hook for any essay presentation or something?
Yeah, I mean, everything comes with time and repetition, right? The more you write and the more you practice this skill, the better you get at forming a hook, at forming something that makes people engaged and want them to read more and listen more to your story. I would say, listen, we have so many tools today that help us with writing. We have ChatGPT, we have all sorts of AI machines that will help us. But the most important thing is repetition and practice. Also using your writing skills, onomatopoeia or like some kind of like writing skills that you learn in English class, just like hooks and similes or like something a comparison, you know, something that draws people in. That just comes with repetition. It's not something you can just go into off the bat and be like, yeah, I wrote a perfect hook. Like I'm done. I can go on to the rest of my story. Take some time, talk to people, like hear what they think about your hook. That's always like crowdsourcing your ideas and seeing, hey, which one's the best one I can come up with? What do you guys think? You have so many tools around you today that can help you write an excellent hook. And it's important that you utilize them. You don't want to be stuck in your own box in your own brain because what's better than just you having other people around you? It's a collective thing. And obviously those people are going to be your audience at the end of the day as well. So you want them to like what you're writing. So it's a good thing to ask other people, use your tools around you, ChatGPT, and then obviously your core writing stuff that you learn in English class, currently in high school.
Thank you. The next question we have is how can a student use emotion or an element of surprise in their personal story to make it truly memorable for a reader or a listener?
So for me, I think in a personal essay, personal statement that you're writing, even specifically for colleges, right? When you're writing that stuff, emotion is everything. When they're seeing your stuff, they're initially seeing your resume, your stats on a page. And once you pass the grade test, you pass the GPA, extracurriculars test, they're gonna read your story. And most college recruiters or college admissions officers, they read the first two sentences and they just leave it. They go on to the next one because it wasn't engaging for them. Now this is true. Like it's happened, and I've talked to actually admissions officers at NYU. Once you get into a school, you can actually request your profile information and see like what made you stand out as a candidate. And 99% of the time, it's the story, right? Right? Emotion drives that. Emotion is everything. You want to find something within yourself that sets you apart. You have to find some way to input that. It doesn't have to be an element of surprise or anything but per chance, but finding something that they can relate to, a key emotion, everyone feels anger, happiness, sadness, whatever it is, and really driving into that point and making it a theme in your entire story, that's important. So really like do a deep dive into your story first too, when you're doing the framework and find what emotion is being appealed to there, you know? That's what I'd say to that.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that. I really like how you emphasize just how important emotion is. I think that'll be something to definitely carry over into our essays. And when it comes to writing essays, we most people make mistakes. And what would you say is the biggest or most common mistake that high school students make when they attempt to tell their story? And what would you say is potential solution to fixing it?
Yeah, so me personally, I actually hated writing in high school, all throughout schooling as well. English was my worst subject for a lot of my schooling time, and I made a lot of mistakes. And my biggest mistake was I would submit my first draft thinking I'd written something fantastic and wonderful. I wouldn't, go and consult other people. I wouldn't go and be like, hey, like, did I actually do a good job? I would just write down what I thought was on paper off the top of my brain and just send it. But I think a lot of high schoolers today, they need to realize that it's becoming a more competitive environment and everything needs more work. You got to put in the effort. I see a lot of people around me just be lazy about something and not put in the time and effort to actually learn the skill. Storytelling is something that you're not just going to use for college admissions. It's something that you're going to use for the rest of your life. Like to this day, in classes that I took at NYU or like even now in my job here, how you present stuff and how you talk eloquently and relate your details, or say your details out. It matters. That's what makes you an important figure in whatever company or environment that you're in at the moment in time. So really, take some time and actually flesh it out. Use your frameworks and get your story built, not just willy-nilly send something in. You know what I'm saying?
Thank you. Now kind of touching back more on the being memorable and using your emotions topic. In the professional world, obviously you have to be really memorable and engaging. So, in your opinion, what is one obvious technique that you would use to ensure that your story sticks with your audience?
So in the professional world especially, you have to realize that you're not going to have a lot of time with the people that actually matter when you're trying to go forward or you're trying to push your ideas up, right? You're going to get a very short amount of time and you have to make a lot of impact in that short amount of time. And what you have to do is you have to find something that's relatable. You have to find something that's emotional, and find something that sticks. It can be tried and true, a lot of stories, that phrase where they say Shakespeare's made every single story that there's ever been created, and every other story after that is a variation of it. Stories work, right? That's why they've been here for so long, long amounts of time. That's why history is passed down through stories as well. You find something in that framework that you appeal to, that you like, you adapt it for yourself, and you make that work for whatever environment you're in. I think it's really important if you're not good at storytelling to find a base, a level set that you can build on for anything that you want to talk about. And I think for me, I did that for myself. I found something that I liked, the framework that I was really drawn to, and I use that in my day-to-day activities and in general as well. So I think that's the best way to use that in a professional setting and really make a strong impact for yourself.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's a great response, really. And when it comes to making something memorable and engaging, there are different essays, different things. Like when it comes to, you talked about a business pitch, how when you're talking to people, you don't have much time with the people that matter. Whereas something like a college application essay, maybe it's like, you know, you do have time, you can think about what you're gonna write. And so, how would be like you telling a story for a college application essay be different from telling a story for a business pitch? And what would apply just overall to all storytelling?
I really like that question because when I was in my college essay prep and I was trying to find something that I could write about. You have to do a deep introspection into yourself, into your life, you know? A lot of people do a lot of similar things. Well, one thing that you might feel like is really unique to you is something that 500 people might have also written about and submitted in their essay to your university of choice, right? But it matters in terms of how you are presenting that information. For example, something in my life that's happened is I've lived in a bunch of different places just coincidentally. Now, I know a lot of people have lived in a bunch of different places, right? But how you portray that and how you speak on that and how you word it, how you like go into detail about what that means to you and how it shaped you as a human is what matters when the admissions officers are reading your paper, right? You have to do a deep dive into yourself, into your activities that you've done. What it really appeals for you? What is something that you're interested about? The other thing is you have to take a step back and think about, hey, like I can't go super in depth into this topic that I really like because the admissions officer is going to be confused when they end up reading my paper. They're going to be like, what is this guy talking about? You know? It takes both sides. It's a balance. When you have so much time to write a paper on something about your life, which at that moment in time, you've been what, 18 years, 18 years old. You have so much stuff that's gone on in your life, but which seems so small. It's such a small amount of time. You've done so much. So you have to find this thing that makes you unique, one, even though other people might have written about it, you have to find the thing that makes your details unique about you, that shaped you as a person today, because every person's unique, you know?
Thank you for
And
that
that's,
response.
yeah, sorry.
Um,
I was just gonna say that's specific to college essays. And then in general, just take some time, man. Like think about what framework works for you.
yeah, thank you so much. I feel like finding that balance between what truly matters is something really important for people to reflect on. So the next question that we had is, how is telling a story for a college application essay different from telling a story for a business pitch? And what rules apply to both?
Um, so I don't think it's that different at all, right? When you're pitching yourself to a college versus pitching an idea you have to a group of investors, it's really not that different. The framework that you're using to do that is pretty similar in a sense that you need to find something that makes yourself unique. That's standard across every story. You need to find the thing that sets you apart. And I know a lot of people say that, but a lot of people don't really realize what that means, you know? You have to do a deep dive into it. When you're presenting a pitch to investors, you have the same amount of time theoretically that you have to build your college essay out, right? Even maybe even more. So you have to really think about like, well, what is this about the idea that makes me unique? What is it me? Do I drive the thing and make it unique because I'm a go-getter and I really like believe in my vision and board and I've shown the drive and energy to prove whatever concept I've built out to my investors and get that funding, right? Or in a college essay environment, like, hey, I'm the person that I'm writing about. So what really sets me apart in terms of pushing me as a candidate forward to be admitted into this college is so I can be first beneficial to them, obviously, because they're gonna want a student that's exceptional and is like, oh yeah, down the line when you're in the news, oh yeah, Rusika is a big CEO of this company and she came from this university, right? And they're gonna want students that are like that, you know? Like, oh yeah, we developed her. But you have to show that in your essay, right? You have to show that you're an outstanding candidate. And it doesn't come just from the GPA that you have and the extracurriculars you have on paper. It comes from telling a story about your life, about something that you've been interested in. So it goes both ways for both investing or pitching to investors and to writing a college paper. I don't think there's that much difference in either.
Okay. You mentioned, or I mentioned, I guess, you're a financial analyst at AT&T.
Mhm.
How do you use storytelling and the power of the pitch in like a day-to-day role to communicate data-backed findings to colleagues or leaders?
Sure. So specifically in my role, I automate a lot of financial processes, and I take that data and I really condense and make into a report, obviously that our VPs and AVPs can understand. And really getting that across comes pretty hard because it's a huge amount of data that comes in that you have to speak about, right? And really portray. So it's really important to talk about things not in very specific terms because obviously not everyone's going to understand those terms. You have to speak in a more broad sense, a high level picture, and pinpoint the data that they want to hear about. You don't want to go in there and speak about literally every single data point that comes through, like, oh yeah, this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened. No one's going to want to hear a list. They want to hear kind of a generalized gist of whatever the data is saying. And then they'll ask specific questions about it, and then you can answer and go more in depth there. And that shows your proficiency in storytelling, and it shows your balance inside of your story, right? Like, okay, they got a nice succinct summary and they want to get more in-depth information about this topic and this topic. I think I did a great job and I'm able to show my proficiency in actually sharing that data as well, right? So again, it comes back to that balance, and I've said this many, many times. You have to find what works for you. And in that case, obviously just being short and succinct and letting them come to you for more information, you know? That's what I'd say.
Thank you. I think it's really important to emphasize that um you get a lot of real-time feedback when you're talking to a person in person. The next question is so our talk description emphasizes that credible stories are backed with data.
Mhm.
So for a high school project, like in a science or history class, what is a practical way to weave in data or evidence to make a presentation more credible?
So I think the question answers it right there too, right? Having data just makes everything more credible. It's evidence right there. But the way you weave it in is important. You're right. You have to speak about it in a way that gels perfectly with the story you're trying to build. For example, in a stock pitch, when you're talking about the financials of a company, for example, I took a class called Equity Valuation at NYU, and I had to value MGM, the casino. You can speak about the financials of it, but you're not going to want to go straight into that. You want to talk about how, okay, they're building in X, Y, and Z countries, they're mass conglomerate. They have so many casinos around the world, and um, this many people come in, but you can't go right into the data. You have to talk about what they're building, what their vision is, what their grander like scope of their business, and um like what they're going into, right? And that's when you weave the data in to support that vision and why it's such a good company to invest in, and why it's meaningful for the data to back their vision, and why it's a good vision to invest in. So it comes like that. You put the vision up front, and then you back it with the data intertwining there. So there's evidence to back up your story. That makes sense?
Okay. So for a project presentation, how do you decide which details to include and which to leave out to keep the story focused and avoid overwhelming the audience with just like too much data or too many details?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, exactly. You don't want to overwhelm your audience with data, right? You want to take the really important points. The first thing you want to look for is outliers, right? That's something that in your company, in your job role, you want to point out that this is something that's out of the ordinary and something you should take a look at, right? That's pretty plain and simple. The other things you should actually look at are what is standard, hey, this and this is actually fine, but this is where we need to kind of look at because this is out of the ordinary here. So you need to put a juxtaposition there too, because it sets the tone for like we're fine here, but this is an alarming problem. It creates a big level set difference, right? So it draws their attention more to what's really out of the ordinary versus what's standard. And when you have that mass amounts of data coming in and you need to pick the right stuff, it's important to kind of look for trends and analyze, what is happening in the environment that you're in. I can't speak to what I'm actually doing at AT&T that much, but you have to look for the gaps in the data that, for example, what is projected versus what actually came in, look for the gaps there and see, okay, what are the factors that are driving these gaps? And how can I solve them and how can I speak to them in my VP meetings and make sure that they get the understanding and they can go solve that problem with the higher ups and talk about that and escalate the issue, right? You have to look for the gaps in the data and the outliers in the data. And then third is having a standard level set to show that this is why it's so important that we need to address this right now.
Thank you. Um, so before we go on to kind of the next section of our questions, just a reminder, we'll have a Q&A session at the end and we'll answer all of your guys' questions. So feel free to put them all in the chat and we'll get through this short section of questions. So now let's talk about personal process and refinement. So you advise students to think about what truly matters to them to identify unique aspects of their lives. So one or two practical ways or exercises that students can do to begin this process of introspection?
Yeah, so that's a great question. You know, you have to start with doing a real introspection on your life. I spoke about this a little bit prior to this, but finding out what you've done in your life is a hard process because you've done so much in your life that you don't even remember, you don't even know about. You know, when I talked about earlier today, I've lived in several different places. Most of that didn't happen until I like most of the movement happened before the age of 3, you know? But it happened and it did change me as a person, whether I like it or not. You know, I did a deep dive into, hey, this makes me unique. What can I actually draw upon that? And what can I like talk about in terms of getting myself out there and presenting myself as a better candidate to the admissions officers, right? So doing a deep introspection into your life is pretty key. I'd say the other thing is, sorry, can you read the question again?
The question was like what are some ways students can practice introspection?
So practicing introspection is you have to actually like do it. One, it's repetition of that introspection and going in and finding key details in your life. And as a high schooler, you have your parents as an excellent resource that can tell you exactly what you've been doing with your life so far, right? It's an awesome resource to have and something you should really rely upon in that sense. Talk to them, talk to people around you, talk to the people, your friends you've grown up with. What have you done that's made you stand out? What are things that you have done and the things you have liked that you want to talk about in your essay? That's one. It's repetition of that. Two is actually sitting down and drawing it out, right? Once you have a list of topics, you need to decide upon what you want to talk about. Charting down how many details you can list about this specific topic, even if it's as simple as, hey, I was a goalie for this soccer team and we didn't go very far, but I loved playing soccer and I just want to talk about soccer. Okay, well, everyone talks about soccer. What makes you unique about soccer? Why do you care so much about soccer that you want to write about it in your college essay? Because people can do that. People have done that and they get into excellent colleges, right? You have to find the details that matter and go through your topics one by one. List out how much stuff you can actually talk about and do a deep dive. You have so much time as high schoolers. You can start from freshman year, right? Ritesh is in eighth grade. You know, he's starting to think about all these stuff right now. So there's never too early to start thinking about what you've done in your life. Obviously, have fun and don't stress about the college process too, but really detail the work that you do and then repetition. Talk to people around you. You know, you want to feel how you want to get a sense of who people think you are, right? Because that's what you will write about and what will eventually show up in your admissions officer paper that they're going to read.
Yeah.
So the things I'd say.
Just a follow-up question.
Mhm.
So for this, do you think the practice of journaling would be helpful?
100%. Yeah, I love journaling. I mean, I didn't journal as much as a high schooler. Um, when I was in college, I actually wrote about random days that I'd have with my friends, you know, and I started a spam on Instagram where I document photos and memories that I've, you know, gone through and experienced. And I love to look back on those memories and it shows me how much I've grown as a person, right? It's similar to someone tracking their gym progress, you know, but it's something that gives you to like details to look back on, and shows, oh yeah, I can write about this specific thing that only happened to me. Like I 100% know like maybe 50 other people have written about this, but did that 50 other people write about it in their essay that they're sending to like universities that I'm applying to, like something that makes you really stand out, because 50 people in a group of like hundreds and hundreds of people who are applying to universities, they stand out, right? So journaling is an excellent habit. Yeah, I fully endorse that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in the response to the last question, you obviously talked a lot about introspection. And when you're like introspecting on your life, there you'll obviously think about moments where you were maybe vulnerable or maybe you failed on something. And how important would you say it is to sort of include those moments that you've made mistakes in a personal story? And how would you talk about mistakes differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think including mistakes in a personal story is a wonderful thing. You're not a perfect human, right? And the admissions officers are going to know that. You can't speak about all the positive that happened in your life without showing some negative that comes off of it. Excuse me one sec. So when you talk about weaknesses in your story and you talk about the problems you've had, it's also important to show that you've solved it or you're on the process of solving it. You're working towards fixing this issue, right? It shows humility. It shows strength in overcoming that problem and weakness. It shows resilience. There's a lot of good qualities about talking about weaknesses that people might not just think about and just put all the great stuff that's happened to them in their life into a personal statement. But that's not personal at all, right? Your life story has ups and downs. Crucial part is the downs. You want to write about that too. So I think that's a great thing to include in your personal statement, to universities. Yeah. But it's also important to write about the solution aspect of it too. You don't want to just write, yeah, I had a slew of problems and I didn't solve any of them. Like they're not gonna want to admit you then, right? But yeah, there you go. Great question.
Thank you. I think this really reinforces the growth mindset concept that we hear about a lot these days. So I know you suggested seeking peer reviews and other real people to look at your writing. So when a friend or when a student asks their friend or mentor to read their story, what is the one most important piece of feedback that they should be looking for?
When you are hearing back from your friend or a teacher or anyone that's reading your stuff, you want to hear that they've been engaged the entire time. You don't want them to lose, especially as someone as close to you as your friend or someone as personal to you as your teacher, right? They know you as a person already, so it's easier for them to stay retained in the story and like really be engaged the entire time when they're reading it. But it's way harder for someone that's a complete stranger to you to actually stay engaged in the story about your life? Like me, I hate reading autobiographies or biographies that people have written unless they have like a really engaging topics at hand, right? Because I don't know anything about this person. Why would I care? In history classes, why am I reading about George Washington? Oh, he was the first president. Oh, he did this and this and this. Oh, wait, I kind of want to read more about him now. That's a lame example, but it stands, right? So you want to make sure that they're engaged. And as a litmus test, it's going to be way easier for them to be engaged as a person. So you take that with a grain of salt. Um, but that's the most important thing you want to hear. Like, hey, you wrote a really good essay that kept me engaged the entire time, and I loved hearing about this part of your story and your life. That's what you want to hear. And obviously the hook too. You want to make sure that they get drawn in immediately.
Yeah, okay. The next question we have for you is how can students practically begin to experiment with language to
Mm,
enhance the writing as you recommended without making the writing sound forced or unnatural? Like you've obviously been talking a lot, just practice, repetition.
yep.
That's the way you get better. Like how would you say would be like an effective method to practice?
Yeah, I mean, man, this sounds so dumb, but just hearing yourself talk, like you sound so full of yourself when you're recording yourself speaking. When you're practicing a speech or something, that's another thing I used to use all the time. When I was in Spanish class, I sucked at Spanish, but I would just record myself speak. Then I would catch, this is particularly for in-person speaking, but I would catch things I would do while I was speaking and be like, well, that's a bad habit. I shouldn't keep that characteristic going when I'm talking to people, right? That's one thing is like actually like sitting alone and being like, hey, this is something I need to work on catching the details that you've um seen that are bad characteristics and bad habits. I would also say, yeah, you mentioned repetition in the question. It's just about repeating, right? And we have a ton of skills now, or a ton of tools nowadays that we can use as individuals that can help us with our writing too. ChatGPT is awesome. I love it. I use AI every day. I fully endorse it. It's not going to sound human 100%. And it's definitely not going to include the personal characteristics that you bring, the flavor that you bring to your story. But it's a great tool for you to get started. And it's a great tool for you to learn actually writing skills and storytelling skills. So use the tools around you and record yourself. Repetition, repetition, repetition is all I'm going to say. You know, it's about repeating the steps, building upon the blocks. Keep doing it, and you'll get way better at it. And it's integral part of it's a life skill, like 100% life skill.
Thank you. And that wraps up all the questions that we have for you. So I know we got a lot of questions in the chat. I think we can start answering those.
Sure.
So the first question we have from the chat is, what's the difference between storytelling in person versus on paper?
Yeah. So I touched on this a little bit just now, actually, right? Storytelling in person is a lot shorter. You have a lot less time to prep for it. For example, you know, the classic elevator pitch. You get in an elevator and then there's the CEO of your company. How do you pitch yourself, right? You have to think of something on the spot. You can have it obviously pre-prep beforehand, but in the moment, you're gonna be, you know, on the spot. You're gonna feel nervous. You're gonna feel anxious. You're gonna be like, how am I gonna like tell him like who I am as a person in this amount of time? The elevator stops in 15 seconds. He's getting off on his floor. It's really important to be calm, to be prepared in a sense. You know yourself as a person. You can introspect and be like, I can draw upon this, this, and this in my life to talk about it, and it's really interesting. And they're gonna be like, oh, you're a cool person. Why don't we get coffee sometime? You know, why don't we set up some time? You know, that's the crux of in person. Now, when you're storytelling on paper, you have a lot more time to prep for it. You have a lot more leeway as well, and you can be a bit more artistic, I would say, in the sense that you can use writing skills, you know, like using similes, metaphors, all of that jazz, right, in your writing and make it really appealing for the reader to read. So you have more time is the big difference, and you can be more artistic and you can be more eloquent. So it's really important to do that, and that's the distinct difference I would say between the two.
In some of the responses that you've given to some of the questions that we've asked, you've talked a lot about introspection, of course, finding something unique to you. And the next question in chat here is,
Hmm.
are there any topics that I should avoid because they are used too much or considered cliche?
Hmm. I wouldn't say there's a topic that comes to my mind that's particularly like, oh yeah, don't use that. It's super cliche or it's super overused. Like, don't do that. I mean, I would say as a general thing, don't talk about like a certain like overarching thing. Like, hey, I did FBLA or BPA or HOSA and I was really good at it. But don't leave it at that. If you're gonna talk about it, talk about the broader themes. Like, I want to go into business because FBLA drew me into this and I blah blah blah. Like this really was the key point that started my like interest and drive into business or HOSA, for example, for like health related stuff. And the other thing is don't be like Mr. Positive. Don't just talk about like, hey, I'm the GOAT. I'm him. I did everything. Like I had nothing wrong that went on in my life. We talked about this earlier. You have to have some humility there because colleges don't want to have someone that just brags, you know, that leaves a bad taste in their mouth and they're not going to want to like admit you, simply put, right? there has to be a balance in what you're writing. You want to talk about how, yes, I'm a strong candidate. I have a lot of strengths, but I also have gone through hardships and I've gotten over them, and that made me a stronger person. That's who I am today. Yeah.
Thank you. I think you already covered the next question actually too, about needing to balance confidence and humility in our essays. So the
Thank
next
you.
question we have for you is, do you have any tips to show personality in essay without sounding too casual or too formal? I think you also touched on this a little bit too.
Yeah. In essays, you want to be artistic and eloquent, right? So when I speak, even to my boss today, I was teaching him some Gen Z slang just cause, I don't have to be too formal because that's not who I am as a person. When you're writing an essay, like you want to be authentic to yourself. Obviously, you're gonna have to be somewhat formal when you're writing it, but you want to be authentic to yourself, right? You're not gonna say yo or whatever in your essay, but you're gonna be, you know, true to yourself. You don't have to be super formal in the sense that y how do I say that? You're not going to be like a D1 author, D1 author. You're not going to be like New York Times bestseller author, right? In writing your essays. So just be true to yourself. Any tips I have in terms of not being too casual, just don't be super like everyday speech in your text that you're writing. Kind of throw in some like artistic elements in there, throw in some flavor and color of your life, but make it a little refined. Obviously, there's a bunch of tools that'll help you do that. There's Coolbot, there's ChatGPT, Cloud AI, there's a bunch of stuff. And talk to other people too. Talk to your English teachers. They are the experts at writing essays, right? Um, that's what I would say in terms of tips and tricks to make it seem a bit better. But me personally, I didn't write like a super duper formal essay and submit that and getting to the school of my choice, right? I wrote true and authentic to myself. It's pretty important for me, especially to this day. You want to be authentic and true to yourself. Yeah.
I mean, here's the final question in chat. Are there ways to learn more about storytelling in practice? And would Toastmasters help? And do you have any other suggestions?
Yeah, Toastmasters is a great tool for helping you learn how to speak, um, learn how to read or speak a story, write a story, in fact, right? Like you're gonna use those skills to actually talk about your life. Um, I was not personally in the organization, but my dad was, and he enjoyed it, and he became a way better speaker as a result of it. I can attest to that. It's a great tool to use. Um, are there more ways to learn? I think I touched upon a lot of them. I mean, for me, the key ways that I liked to learn about storytelling is just obviously talk about it a lot, repetition, talk to the people around you, bro. It's really important skill. Like being able to make connections with people around you, being able to have friends, that's part of storytelling, right? It's a telling sign that you're a social person, that you can have connections external to yourself and your family. That's really important. And it's something that everyone has. It's very casual, but it's also important. Like, hey, I can do this. I have the ability to do this. Everyone's got the ability to do this. Just talk. Just talk to people. Repetition again. Um, introspect. That's all I can say. Those are my three mantras in terms of storytelling.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. Um,
Hmm.
I think since this is the last question, that brings our session to a close. Thank you so much for sharing your incredible insights on the power of the pitch. We learned
Hmm.
a lot, and thank you for talking about the importance of storytelling and how it really impacts our life, and also the power of having like peers and mentors and having that real life connection to get feedback and advice.
Hmm.
Um, Also for reassuring that we can use AI and ChatGPT as a starting
100%.
point for our writing.
Hmm.
So now on to our participants. Thank you so much for attending. We truly hope you leave today feeling inspired and also equipped with valuable new storytelling skills from Sanjay. Um, Also, please make sure to send us your suggestions for future session topics. For details on upcoming talks, for recordings, and way more, you can make sure to visit our website at peer-up.org. And if you enjoyed today, please share Peer Up with your friends and make our community grow. We have a lot of amazing content on our website, as I said before. So if you have any follow-up questions for the team, please reach out. Thank you so much for making this a great session. Once again, Sanjay, thank you everyone for attending.
Yeah, thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to give back to the community. I grew up in Bothell and then I moved to Dallas later, but I'm excited to see people, grow up and actually utilize these skills and hopefully you gain something out of it. But thank you again for allowing me to give back. Yeah, appreciate it.